new products you guys want to talk about. So that's going to be fun.
Yeah, I really
talk about.
Say what?
New products that we want to talk about?
Products or business. Isn't there a new line you guys are running?
Oh, Project Hemp Flower specifically?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm definitely happy to talk about that.
Awesome.
Well, welcome. Now is no better time than now to talk about it. I, of course, have a lot of questions because you're so educated and good at this. I've, over this last couple of weeks, had an overload of concerns come from various different business owners about rules and regulations and laws. And I kind of wanted to chat about where you see some of the solution fitting and where, just in general, like the industry. And is that my internet? Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay, good.
If I'm giving an echo or anything, let me know and I can try to switch to a headset.
You're good too. Both of you are fine.
So anyways, welcome. Welcome, Chris.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for having me again.
Thank you very much for coming. I always enjoy when we get a guest that is not only highly requested by other people to come back and chat, but somebody that I thrive. I feel like this is my one-on-one and my time with you.
Awesome. Well, I always appreciate the invite and I love chatting with you guys. So
awesome. So tell me a little bit about Project Hemp Flower. Last time we spoke, we didn't mention or talk about that very much. You guys had it in the works, but tell me how it's evolved and where you're at.
Yeah, so we started a company, Project Hemp Flower, that launched about 3 weeks ago. And its primary business model is to find top shelf hemp flower that has been grown or curated with a marijuana style, if you will. So it's top shelf, it's quality smokable, it's been cured properly, et cetera. And then we try to pay the farmer a little bit above market for the flower so they can benefit. When we put the flower on our site, we brand it to the farm. So as a consumer, you know the farm it's coming from, not just, most e-commerce sites like this, like ours, they rebrand it. Like they're white labeling everything. You don't know where it's coming from. And they try to say this is our flower. We're not doing that. The only flower that we'll ever say is ours is something we grow. Everything else is the farmers. And we're just here to get that farm exposure to consumers and the consumers exposed to the farm. It's also good for the consumer because if you're buying from another site that doesn't disclose what farms they're using, you often don't know when they've run out of product from farm A and have switched to farm B. So you may be getting Lifter and you like it and you purchase a bunch, and then all of a sudden your next purchase, the flower is totally different. And it's because they've had to switch farms, but you don't know that because they don't disclose the farm. It's not very transparent. So with us, when it runs out of flower from farm A, oh, well, there's no more left at farm A. Let me try farm B. And it's a different product. It's a different farm with a different style. And you can get to know the farms that you think do a good job and farms maybe that you won't buy again. But we're very transparent with that. The farm's label gets or logo gets put on every package of theirs that gets sent out to customers. We have a little bio for the farm. And then something else we're doing unique is that when we buy the product and we get it in-house, we're taking out of the batch we have personally in our possession and sending out a sample for full panel testing. So we are ensuring that it's Delta 9 compliant and that it's safe flower. It's got the heavy metals, microbials, mycotoxins, residual solvents, et cetera. We do a full panel with cannabinoids, a full terpene profile. So by the time it's on the site, you know that it's safe. It's federally compliant flower. You know the farmer that grew it. And you get a really good snapshot of the cannabinoid as well as the terpene profile. So you kind of know what you're getting instead of kind of guessing. And then the other thing we're doing is we have a couple celebrity judges, if you will, that we send a sample of the flower to, and they do a review, and we highlight those reviews on the site so that as a consumer, you can see, oh, this person who knows what they're talking about that is not super related to the company did a review, and this is what they think about it. This way we can get firsthand account of the effects as well as the smoke quality and et cetera.
Sure.
One of those, our chief judge is actually Rob Allen. I'm sure you guys are familiar with Rob.
Yeah.
We love Rob. He's such a good guy, and he knows what he's doing, and he's such a professional. And we're very happy to be working with him on this. And we've got a couple of celebrities as well.
I can't wait until it's not so busy, so we can have Rob on our show as well.
Yeah,
He's such a big
absolutely.
fan. So I'm excited. I'm excited to introduce him to everybody else that doesn't know him.
Right.
Real quick, before you finish or take off, there's one question here on how are you testing farms?
So we don't test the farms themselves. We do. I don't know how many viewers know about this, but I was the previous founder of Hemp Exchange, and through Hemp Exchange, we developed a keen sense for how to determine if a farm is legit or not to begin with before we engage business with them. And it really just comes down to common sense, right? Do you have a license? Can we verify that license exists with the state ag department for the state you're in? And is that license current? Right? It's not rocket science. There's no secret sauce here. But once we verify that they are in fact licensed, they are who they say they are, we know we're at least in a good enough position to get a sample of the product. Once we have the product in hand, we are sending that product to our preferred lab, which is Think 20. Think 20 is based out of Southern California, and they have a bunch of folks that started that company have a pharmaceutical background, and their level of detection is one of the lowest, if not the lowest, in the country. So you may pass on heavy metals from Lab A, but you send it to Think 20 and then it fails, which some businesses would look at as a negative because they're trying to pass their products so they can get it in the hands of consumers. But I look at that as a positive because I want to know factually whether or not this has heavy metals. Not does it have heavy metals you can detect, right? So the lower the level of detection, the better. And Think 20 has really super low abilities. So we're happy to work with them. They're great folk. Every COA we get from them has a QR code, and we put that QR code on the package as well as the website. So you can download the PDF and look at it yourself. You can scan the QR code when you get the product in hand and go right to Think 20's COAs. So, yep, that's how we sample and how we test.
I love it. And I like that you say common sense. When we talk business outside of the industry, making sure you have a business license and all of the regulations and everything are in place seem like common sense. But it's a hot topic, even in people that call me about registering a product and understanding the cost to do so. However, realizing that by not registering and not getting a business license, you're not a legitimate business technically, or you are, but really, when we talk in our previous videos or previous live hours about what are we looking for in sustainability and growth, and to me that seems like the first step or the first common sense in am I going to register, and what opens our businesses and our listeners to opportunities like working with you is making sure you're a legitimate business, right?
Yeah. And it's what the industry needs right now. For a couple of years now, the hemp industry has operated very loosely, and we don't have that much regulation. Sometimes it feels like, especially if you've never worked in a regulated environment, it seems like, there's too many regulations in the hemp industry. There's not really. There are barely any, actually. In fact, we could probably use more. And this coming from a fairly small government, libertarian-leaning individual, we actually need more regulation in the hemp space to make sure that everyone's playing by the rules and the consumers are getting safe products. So at this point, if you're not getting a business license, if you're not following the rules of your state, if you're not working with your ag department to try to affect positive change, but in a professional manner, you're actually hurting the industry. You're giving reason for legislators to say, wait a minute, it's unregulated, it's untraceable, it's unsafe. We need to make this illegal or be negative towards this industry. The more people that get on board with good practices, good SOPs, and follow the rules, and work with their Department of Ag in their state to help make a positive impact for the industry, the more legislators are going to get on board with, okay, this is a legitimate industry that care about consumer health and safety. Let's help them out instead of trying to make it more difficult.
Well, and I think you said it well, right? I'm super attracted to the fact that you and or anybody is not looking for the easiest way to put product out on the market, but is looking for the safest, best avenue, right? That may cost us a little bit, right? It may take us a little bit more refining or a better product or better cultivation habits, whatever that is.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really impressive when a business is actively seeking, and you hear this a lot, right? Product stays on the market because it's good product.
Yeah.
So business is actively seeking those best practices. I think that's even more valuable and important when we talk about the success and not just business license, but really looking for those labs that are not just passing your product along or giving you a quality, or a COA that passes so that you can be on the market.
Yeah, there are labs out there that will change their level of detection on a COA by COA basis at the request of the customer to pass something that shouldn't otherwise pass. And as far as I'm concerned, those labs just need to be shut down and put out of business, because it's one thing if your equipment can only do a certain LOD and you're transparent about that. It's different if you're intentionally moving the numbers to make something compliant that otherwise wouldn't be. It's unsafe for consumers, it's dishonest, and those labs need to be shut down. And that's where I think we can use more regulation is defining what's the minimum LOD that you must keep in order to work as a lab in this space. I don't necessarily think, I don't agree with the original IFR stance that test labs need to be DEA certified. I think there's definitely some harm to the industry by some overregulation in some of those capacities. But I do think that, requiring labs to be ISO certified and requiring certain SOPs just makes sense for the industry as a whole. As a buyer and a seller in the wholesale side, don't you want to know that you're talking the same, it's oranges to oranges or apples to apples when you're buying and selling? And then as a consumer, as you get educated, do you really want to keep track of what labs are following good practices and which ones aren't? Or would you rather just know if this came from a lab in the space that I know they're regulated properly and they're doing a good job?
Well, and in every other industry, that's common, right? And I look at, I don't agree, like you said, I don't agree with the way some of the regulations are put into place. Mm-hmm. However, because of these bad practices that continue to happen, they're going to do a grab to regulate and eliminate the risk. And if that means eliminating it completely, that's what they're going to do, because there's still risk out there regardless of what they've put into place for best practices. And so I think the faster that we're able to create business licenses, have those SOPs, making sure that labs, like I said, just knowing that when I take something to the lab, it is going to be the same whether it comes from lab A or lab X. Exactly. Yep. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And what people don't realize often is that regulators like the Utah Department of Ag and Food, their job is to make things safe, right? Their job is not to make your business successful. Now, that may be a second mission of theirs, is to help you be a success, but it does not overwrite their first rule of let's make sure things are safe. And if we're not participating in a manner that helps them make things safe, then they're just going to start shutting things down as much as possible. But if you can show as an industry, we also are trying to make this safe, so you don't have to worry about number one. Now let's focus on number two. But until they're comfortable with number one, they're not going to care about number two. So we really have to make sure we're working with our state ag departments to make things safe for consumers as step one, and then we can talk about how to make this industry successful.
Well said. And I think that's the biggest reason that we get together on such a regular basis with really the people that are eager to make the industry change, and not selfishly, but collectively, as a big group. I like here, we've got a nice comment. I mean, I know a guy who can keep track of all of this stuff for us.
Justin's awesome.
He is.
His system is pretty great. I haven't done a deep dive on it yet, but I've been talking to Justin for over a year, I think, about his system, and he knows his stuff. And I hope all the best for Hemp Batch Tracker, and I think it's going to perform really well. But he's absolutely right. The from seed to sale tracking is something that hasn't been regulated and forced upon the industry yet. but it certainly might be. And honestly, it might be really good for the entire industry. Yeah, there can be some pain involved in getting companies and processors and manufacturers and farmers on board with the program to use that type of software and tech. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's only going to help the industry be safer. I mean, a lot of times, especially in well, actually, really all hemp products, from flower to derivatives, half the time it's been brokered 4 or 5 times, and you have no idea where it came from. And heaven forbid someone takes a tincture that happened to have E. coli in it or something, and they get really sick, and you can't even track back to where it came from. That's the type of thing that is scaring the legislators. That's the kind of thing that's scaring the regulators. And if we as an industry make that step before something bad happens and it forces their hand, we're better off. But there's no doubt that if anything really bad happens in this space, the hammer's going to drop on everyone, and it's going to be way more strict because of that number one rule, right? They've got to look at that first.
Well, and again, this goes back to safety and compliance. Where does the risk lie? If I consume that product, who do I blame for that? If something's wrong, right? And I know that seems kind of weird to some people in the sense in this industry, and it's an argument that we have or a discussion we have on a regular basis. But on the legislation side or on the business side of any of these big businesses putting hemp into their product, is they have to make sure the risk is not on them or anything down to a drug test, right? Absolutely cannot put the risk out there, let alone E. coli or any other pesticide or metals that we're consuming. Any of this product that's coming in with high metals from other countries or even here in the United States. If the lab isn't regulated, the risk is still out there, regardless if there's a COA or not.
Yep.
Crazy. So I have a question. Tell me a little bit about how you've touched on this a little bit, but how did your experience at Hemp Exchange really drive your business here? Like, what did you really pick up as far as industry trends and what's happening on the sale and buy side? And then what do you see different from, this is a big question, I know, but where do you see different in like what consumers want versus where the industry is actually going? I feel like there's a big difference when I read a lot of reports in, people wanting isolate or people wanting a tea-free distillate on the buyer side, but very little market push in the industrial side.
Yeah, so good questions. Let me break down the first one, which is, what did I see at Hemp Exchange that's sort of not driving this new company, but what did I learn there that's applied here? Anyone in the hemp industry working the B2B side in the last 2 years has a very similar experience to mine with Hemp Exchange, and that is that transparency is non-existent, traceability is non-existent, safety is questionable, and half the time you're talking to a broker chain of between 1 and 10 people, and sometimes there's not even a real deal on the table. You deal with brokers who are like, I got to buy 10,000 pounds of flour and it's got to be done by Thursday and it needs to meet these qualifications and da-da-da. And you go through all the hoops to find that product for them and get them a COA and show them that the product's real. And then it turns out that they were finding it for another guy who's finding it for another guy. And either there was a miscommunication or it just was never real to begin with. And the other thing that we learned, and a lot of people in the industry know this now too, that brokers would often create a demand for something that they didn't actually have a demand for, so they could create an inventory list to know where real products were, and then they turn around and go try to sell that product. So half the time someone was telling you, yeah, I got this. I've got 100,000 pounds on the ground in Kentucky, blah, blah, blah. Well, they don't really have anything. They talked to someone who said they could fulfill an order for them, and they were just trying to get their quantity out of them. And now they're trying to sell that product without the permission of the person who owns the product. So the traceability through end products, and this is all the way down through like distillate, right, which is going into an end product. You'd think if you're buying pills or a tincture or something off the shelf that it's been done through reputable channels. And oftentimes you're just picking up 100 kilos of distillate. You don't know what lab made it. You can test it for safety, but you still don't know where it came from. And most of the product on the shelves for a long time came out of a black box in the supply chain that you couldn't really trace.
So we had a guest recently that bought a couple kilos and met someone in a parking lot in the trunk of his car. Had a COA, but that's the type of transactions that are still happening, and it's not illegal. What he did wasn't technically illegal. They had transportation permits, but meeting in the parking lot to deliver kilos of isolate.
Yeah, it's weird, and there's a lot of meet me at such and such place at such time deals. There's still a lot of cash deals happening. The supply chain side still has a lot of problems to figure out. Justin's comment, that's something a batch tracker or a seed to sale platform can fix if people use it, right? And you've got to get people to use stuff like that. And then just it comes down to the buyers too. Buyers of products need to be more selective and stop engaging in those type of practices when they're purchasing. There's no excuse now. There's product everywhere. I mean, if you want a kilo of isolate, you practically trip on it walking down the street. And if you're looking for biomass, there's millions of pounds sitting in barns right now just collecting dust that isn't moving. So there's no excuse at this point. It was kind of born out of necessity. You didn't know who had what, and if you could actually find someone that delivered, you were happy. But now there's no reason not to work directly with the processing lab that's making that derivative, or working directly with a farmer. And there's nothing wrong with ag brokers. I should say this too. Brokers get a bad name in the hemp industry because of 99 out of 100 brokers or worse weren't real brokers. They were just hustlers trying to make a buck. Legitimate brokers that do their due diligence, show transparency with where they're finding things, that are offering a service. There's nothing wrong with that. So either work with a legitimate broker or go direct to manufacturer or direct to the source, because there's no excuse anymore in the industry to not know where your product's coming from. And saving a buck to make it happen is just, if that's what you're all about, then you're hurting the industry.
And you're in the wrong industry.
Yeah.
Everybody that I've talked to, like it's the green rush, right? The gold rush, whatever you want to call it. But is it really? I mean, I hear more often than not, this is a very difficult career and very difficult industry.
Super difficult.
And I think equally as much, knowing who to talk to, do your research, right? Make sure that you're partnering and engaging with the right people before. And that requires less of a transaction and more of a relationship.
Yep.
And so utilizing people like you, I'm always fascinated. Anytime a big deal comes in, I know, Chris, that you've got great people and have vetted them. And so I always reach out, because that's just the brokering piece it's not my job, right? It's not my business. That's not what I'm about. I want to see good people connected. And if I've got an opportunity to provide a buy or a sale to somebody that's doing it right, that's more my focus. And so I open that up both on the people that are listening as well as moving forward. If somebody has a product to sell and or buy, needs to buy, don't hesitate to reach out, and we'll help make connections with people that are doing it right.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know you're open for that as well. If somebody's looking for good product, you're great at least pointing direction where you are not.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't broker much these days. But like you, if someone comes to me with something and I know that I can source it for them, I usually just connect them and just stay out of it and say, I don't really need a commission. If you want to give me a commission, great, but I'm just about making the industry function at this point, and making good connections, because if the industry succeeds, everyone in the industry is going to reap the benefit of that. And if the industry fails, we're all going back to some other industry that's way less fun, and has less of an impact. Now to sort of tackle the second part of your question from several minutes ago, consumer demand, right? Where's the consumer demand at? The consumer demand, I don't think, has wavered. Let's talk about, first of all, let's identify there's the cannabinoid side of hemp and there's the fiber side of hemp, or we'll say the industrial side of hemp. On the cannabinoid side of hemp, More and more, I'm finding more people coming out of the woodworks that are hearing about CBD and wanting to try CBD for some reason or another. And they're not very educated, and they don't. It's not because they lack education or they're ignorant. It's because they don't know where to find this good source of education. So things like this that we're doing right now, that you guys are doing, are phenomenal. And there needs to be more stuff like this because education is really part of that consumer demand portion. And it's growing. Demand is growing. More and more people I talk to that wouldn't have touched CBD a year ago are like, I think I might try it for whatever ailment I have. So tinctures, edibles, flour is really a really hot item right now. And Delta 8 actually is coming on the scene in the hemp space in a big way. And the demand is there. The reason we saw, when people say there's no demand and that's why the pricing has fallen through the floor, they're not talking about consumer demand. They're talking about product manufacturer purchase demand on the supply chain side. Because what happened was we ramped up the industry in anticipation of fulfilling this massive consumer demand. And we needed bigger players in the industry to consume the amount of product we created in this last year, this whole last season, starting last fall. And the FDA came out and basically squashed all hopes of even medium to big players coming out and participating by saying, hey, just a reminder, the FDA is saying that CBD is non-ingestible. If you're ingesting it in any way, shape, or form, it's technically illegal because we haven't said yes to that, and we're in control here. And until we do, you can't do that. Well, what that's done is freaked out. Anyone that was in the industry up to that point is inherently somewhat risk. They accept some risk. They're willing to play in risky industries a little bit. So those people aren't going anywhere. But the medium to enterprise-sized businesses and entities are very risk averse, and they're not going to put something on a shelf that could risk their credit card processing or risk their bank account or risk getting sued by a consumer, or heaven forbid the FDA comes down on them really hard and it affects their entire business. So Pepsi is not going to put CBD in their Coke until FDA says it's okay. So we created all of this product and all of this this supply to meet the demands of these big players coming on the scene, expecting it to explode, and the FDA just kind of sat on their thumbs and ruined it all. So the consumers want it, the supply is there, but the middle processors and product manufacturers are sitting on the sidelines waiting for the FDA to get their act together. And until they do, we're going to sit on this supply. Now, if someone like Pepsi or GW or somebody else big came to the market and said, we're going to start a line of CBD gummy bears and a CBD drink and et cetera, we could consume what's in the supply chain pretty quick. But until that point, it's going to last. It's going to take us years to go through what we've already created if we're just talking about the smaller manufacturers, or we wait for the smaller manufacturers to grow big enough to really start hitting more consumer channels and verticals. So as far as consumer demand, the consumer demand's there. The product manufacturer demand is lacking because of the FDA. And generally speaking, flower is really huge. We're seeing, and we'll maybe talk about this later, but it's really interesting to people that are like, why would you ever smoke hemp, or why would you ever vape hemp? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't have THC in it. That's a separate issue, but there's plenty of people that are well aware of what hemp flower is, and they're repeat consumers for a variety of reasons, and they're very happy with it. Tinctures, I know personally almost everyone in my circle is using either a tincture or a pill of some sort on a daily basis to offset something. And that demand is all still there. I think gummies is huge too, especially for kids. Like my son, Davis, he's now old enough, he's taking pills, but he has tics really bad. He does like that sort of thing, And if he takes 60 milligrams, actually 50 milligrams of CBD a day, he doesn't have them anymore. They just don't exist. So he can focus better in school. He can do a lot of things that he couldn't do otherwise. And when he was younger, gummies was the way to do that, right? Super easy. It tastes good. He wasn't comfortable swallowing pills. So all of that stuff is still there. The demand is high. It's about educating the consumers to know what options they have and what might work best for their particular needs, which is also sort of a sketchy area because the FDA also is like, you can't say there's any medical efficacy to any of this. So it's simultaneously like, we want to educate people so they can be safe and so they can be knowledgeable and make good choices when they purchase. However, we're not allowed to talk about what CBD might do for them and their ailments without crossing a line with the FDA. So it's like they're simultaneously wanting us to be an industry that's upfront and honest and safe, and then hindering us from having those conversations to some extent. So yeah, that's the consumer side of the cannabinoid side of the plant. The fiber side, I don't think there's a consumer of products that would say, no thanks, I'd rather a product that hurts the environment. But what we do have are consumers that will say, I'm all about saving the environment, but I'm not about paying $80 for a t-shirt. I just can't do that. I'm going to pay $10 for a t-shirt or $20 for a t-shirt. And so we have this problem where most people on the planet would agree that, if all things are the same, they're going to take the renewable option instead of the non-renewable option. But it's like solar. And I think I said this on our last call, right? If you tell someone, if you put solar panels on your house, it's going to have a net positive effect on your carbon footprint. That's better for the environment. They're like, that's great. I'm all about that. But it costs 4 times the amount that you're paying now. Never mind. I'm not that about that. So we need to get fiber to a place where it can create consumer goods and construction material and all the various things it can do at a reasonably competitive price to existing products in the market. And that's really hard because we've built up these raw material ingredients to enterprise level scale where margins are razor thin. And it's really hard to break through that and disrupt those industries, right? Plastics have been around forever now, and the price is the price. It doesn't get lower than people are selling plastic for to manufacturers. And it's because it can't. So we have to compete with those crazy low prices on a very mature industry with very small scale operations with an immature industry. And it's pretty much impossible to some extent. So what it's going to take to drive that side of the industry is a bunch of big players to infuse a bunch of cash and know that this is the long game, not the short game. We're going to lose a bunch of money up front. It's going to take a huge investment, but it is going to return big time in the long run. And we're going to be first movers in the market. And we're seeing some of that happen now. There's a ton of entities out there that are dumping millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars into the fiber industry this year, next year. I don't know if we'll see a ton of crops coming this next spring for fiber, but the year after, I guarantee we're going to see hundreds of thousands, literally millions of acres of fiber being planted in the U.S. And that's great. It's coming back to some of our American heritage roots. And we should be. And it's great for the environment. It's great for our farmers. And it's great for consumers because they're going to get a lot more options for renewable products.
It's baffling to me every day when I sit down and I talk to somebody about what hemp does on the fiber side as far as textiles and clothing. And I know Patagonia has a whole line now, and Levi's has a whole line now, and Tesla or BMW are putting it in their vehicles. And so there's it's going everywhere, right? But with you, I also have a lot of people reaching out saying, okay, we've got all these patents and we're ready to start growing or put the money in. Now we don't have the fiber. Now we don't have the grow. So we're in this in between of, horse before the buggy or buggy before the horse. We really need fiber planted so that we can keep our supply chains in the United States. However, we're stuck, right?
Yeah, and what we don't want to do is what we did with the cannabinoid part of the side of the plant is have a bunch of farmers planting stuff, hoping there's a market when it comes time to harvest. If we do that, the fiber industry, the margin is way slimmer than the cannabinoid industry for the farmer. Now, it's an easier crop, generally speaking, than the cannabinoid side of the plant, but the margins are still pretty thin, especially because, going back to that previous comment of trying to get prices down on the products we make with them to be competitive, there's a lot of pressure on the farmer to produce a crop at a really cost-effective per acre ratio. And because of that, we don't want farmers to go plant 100,000 acres of fiber and then not have a market for it, or find out that they use the genetic that is best used for creating plastics, and no one's buying for that. They're all buying for creating textiles. So there's a huge education need on the farmer side for what genetics and what you're looking for based on the end product. And they need to plant with the end product in mind, which means they really need to plant basically with contract in hand. So there's, like you said, cart before the horse. Some of these manufacturers that have a patent know what they want to produce. They need contracts from buyers that are producing the end product, or they need to show real consumer demand for their product at the price point they can create it. Then they need to turn around and give contracts to farmers and say, look, this is exactly what I need. These are the genetics I need. This is how much I need. Now go ahead and go plant it and we'll buy it up. So that's what's needed.
This is where I think the value of an association becomes so powerful, right?
Yeah.
Is the education piece has to happen on the mass scale for a lot of reasons. This comment right here says, on rural satellite radio this week, it looks like corn prices are dropping, and some Midwest farmers are looking for hemp fiber as an alternative. I don't think that's just I know that's not just corn, alfalfa, cotton, the value, not just on your per acre, but what it does for our earth and the air and the oxygen and water consumption. But again, it comes back to educating them and their communities of, the benefit and the price.
Yeah.
What is the best value in starting in Utah and then nationwide and worldwide, creating that education platform to get information out? Where do you see, how do we, as fast as we can, get information out to them?
So yeah, that's a good question. I think, one, we need to have good information to give them in the first place, right? And I think, in general, the CBD Collective, Utah Can, there's a lot of folks in Utah that are quite educated in this realm. And even with the people we have in Utah, there's still a bunch we don't know. And we don't know where are the contracts? Where are these product manufacturers with money in hand looking for fiber, right? We need to get those guys together and come up with a plan to help them secure fiber. We need to educate farms on not just what hemp is and the legality of it, but the different strains, the different products, and what you're growing for, and what you might need. And for that, we need, there's experts in the country. I don't know any in Utah personally, but there's experts in the country that already know this. They're already experts in the field because they're managing farms outside of the U.S. Right? We've had hemp in the country as a product forever. I mean, even in the 80s, you could go buy hemp twine at Hobby Lobby or Joann's Fabrics. It exists, but we weren't allowed to grow it here. So we were using the product as consumers, but not creating the product here. We weren't growing the crop here. And so there are experts that were working in the U.S. that are U.S. based that had farms outside of the U.S. And they're literally just waiting for the cost to make sense for them to bring that back into the country. So we need people like that to help educate and spread the word to other farmers on, this is what you need to know. This is what our farms do. This is what you grow for. And I really think we should put together an educational course that farmers can sit through, and then big Q&A. Farmers are not always tech savvy, and sending them a PowerPoint presentation and expecting them to sit through it and retain that is not always feasible. And these people are out working their butts off every day in the field, and they often are not super happy to then come back after work, a 14-hour day in the hot sun, and sit in the computer for 2 hours and try to learn something.
They're just not going to do it.
They're just not going to do it.
What they're doing is working, and they want to make it work, and it's worked for 60 plus years, and so that's what they're interested in.
Yeah.
Even though it's something better, it really has to be as easy as it can and as inviting as it can. And so what's the hook? What's their pain point? What's their interest? Yeah.
Yeah, and it comes down to the local network, right? So where you're talking about how a trade association can help with something like that. Mm-hmm. Having chapters that are local to a farming community where we can disseminate that information and education quickly into a person-to-person conversation style, right? Having a get-together at the local police station in their community room with 50 farmers from the Heber Valley to go over a presentation and have time for Q&A to answer all their questions. That's what's going to move the needle to get farmers educated. And so I think that's what's needed is a strong network of education.
I love it. And I think you said it right, is we're tech savvy. We're used to online stuff, to digital things, but remembering who our audience is that we're trying to attract and educate. And it was really eye-opening to me when I went to my first cannabis event, and everybody uses business cards. And in the tech space in Salt Lake, that is not how it is. We have digital cards, there's tap cards, there's, you share your LinkedIn profiles, and they do not in the cannabis space. And so I think that, keeping in mind as we grow these associations or grow our footprint in the nation on in hemp, is who is our audience and who are we really targeting and how. And same with paper in-hand copies. That's very important compared to the digital PowerPoint, like you said. Very different. I've also heard really good feedback from the state, that when we do host these events, farmers are eager to learn. People want to know. The buzz has been around. It's not as scary anymore. I think if we can collaborate and really create, like you said, that supply chain so that our farmers now know, hey, we have this big need, whether it's a manufacturing of homes or manufacturing of clothing or whatever it is, but we have this need. Now here's presenting the opportunity.
And farmers are excited. When's the last time we had a new crop in the country?
Right.
I mean, it's been a long time. I think, probably stevia is sort of a newish crop to us.
Right.
But, there's some minor things like that, but nothing at the scale that hemp is. Nothing that your average everyday farmer is looking at going, interesting. Maybe I should take a look at that. And frankly, I'm all for capitalism in general, but there is a point of diminishing returns when it comes to farming and capitalism, where only the giant ag producers can survive because the margin's so thin that a 5-acre farmer can't live anymore because they can't compete with the 100,000-acre farm. So farmers often, rural America is built on the backs of farmers on small homesteads, if you will. They live on their farm. They've got between, let's say 5 and 100 acres, and they're smaller scale. And when that margin crushes them out of existence, it's not just one farm. It's like 98% of our farmers, right? And only the big ag survives. And there's nothing wrong with big ag inherently either. I think we need it for the volume that we produce, but we need to protect the 98% of rural American farmers that are small scale and figure out a way to keep them fed, keep their families fed, and keep them around. I personally don't want to live in a country where farm is only giant ag and there's no small farmers anymore. And things like farmers markets can help with that. Sourcing locally as a consumer helps with that. Asking, the hard questions. Where does this lettuce come from? Like, is this shipped in from China or from across the country, or was this done in the county next to me? Those are important questions to ask, but we need to create crops too where the price makes sense for the farmer. And that's where I think hemp can really help. I know that the margins on fiber are really slim, but I still think they outperform a lot of other crops as far as potential return. And if we can get these 5 to 100 acre farmers involved in a crop where they can make a living, that's great for the entire country, independent of the inherent benefits of the hemp, right? If it was some new plant that was used for animal feed, it would still be great for the country because of supporting those farmers. But it would just, luckily the hemp has a lot of other benefits globally inherent to the product itself. But, I think we need to take care of the farms.
What other product or crop have you ever seen that fits into every single vertical possible? The part that's really appealing for me is if you grow cotton, you're growing cotton for clothing or, one small industry. If you're growing alfalfa, it's one small vertical. If you're growing hemp, you may be fascinated or interested in plastics. Your farm next to you may be growing for smokable flower. The next farm may be for, clothing or building supplies. And so I think that there's a huge appeal to the number of people that not only financially it can help, but when you become passionate about what you're doing, there are so many opportunities on the offtake agreements and understanding what those are based on where your interests are.
Yeah.
And where it is, it's not it's still a community, right? It's still a plant. It's still hard work. It's not throw the seeds in the field and walk away. That it is still hard work. And so understand you have to have that. There has to be more to it than just the dollar, especially with profit margins being what they are.
Yep. Agree 100%.
And every commodity's profit margins are very small.
Yeah.
Yep. That's the supply and demand, and that's what we do to make it affordable. And I do think that initially it's going to be a little bit more expensive, but long term, when I look at the cost of building houses with hemp compared to wood or drywall, the cost of drywall, let alone sustainability, it's mind-boggling to me.
Yeah.
I'm going to put this out there. My goal is that we build a hemp home here in Utah, and I'll live in it, but we'll use it as a spec home so everybody can see it.
Yeah.
It's the next thing. I have no doubt.
Yeah, it's needed. People need to see what it can do, and the possibilities for what hempcrete can do in the construction space cannot be overstated. The sustainability factor, the regenerative factor for our soil, if we actually have a widespread crop grow in the country, the insulation it provides. There's a lot of massive benefits just on the concrete side of hemp, let alone flooring, roofing, and etc.
Drywall,
there's a huge opportunity for hemp to totally disrupt the construction scene. And you're right, the product is more expensive right now, but you're also saving in the long run for how long that material is going to last and how well it's going to insulate your home. So you're saving on energy costs for heating and cooling. There's a lot of trade there. While it seems more expensive up front, it may not actually be in the long run. And I'm not an expert with those numbers specifically, but I think it's worth looking at. And I think that as we produce more, the price is going to come down anyway. So we just need to get people, early adopters. There's in tech, we talk a lot about the adoption curve, right? There's like the super early adopters, and then there's, your average group, and then there's your late adopters, et cetera. We need those super early adopters right now to just jump in. If you are wealthy and you believe in sustainability, you should buy the $2,000 hemp suit. You should get your next construction project made out of hempcrete. Like, we need to push those things for people that can afford it, that want to be early adopters, to help spur the industry.
I'm eager to host at some point a sustainability event where we have people pitch sustainable products. And I know hemp will be probably the most commonly pitched product, right? Whether it's building supplies or homes. But Chris, I'll tell you what, in the meetings I've been in the last couple of weeks, I feel like we're going back to 1920s prices to build homes.
Right.
We have people building homes for less than $20,000 at a very reasonable rate because hemp is that affordable. The cost comes, like you said, in the manufacturing plant up front. But growing, we talk even ability to grow, 3, 4, 5 crops a year across our nation, compared to 1 every 10 years with wood. It gets me going. It just is. We had this whole time, right? And now we're really making the change. And big companies are coming on, and they are starting to manufacture at some of these name brands. And I think that the more common that you see it, obviously the more readily available the technology will be.
Right.
Okay, being a tech guy, I've been really intrigued and have always said that I've wanted my slogan to be where Utah tech and cannabis connect. Mm-hmm. What do you see as a benefit to Utah and our tech community in regards to the cannabis industry?
I think just going back to that traceability aspect, I think there's a lot of tech, and that's kind of the software side of things, right?
Yeah.
On the software side of tech, having that traceability, leveraging things like Hemp Batch Tracker, and doing things where you're keeping good quality control and using data from the tech you're using to make decisions based on your nutrient cycle and based on your production and based on when you're harvesting. And we have a huge tech community here, and we can build the tools that don't exist now to create better yields, to help prevent risk mitigation scenarios for crops and that sort of thing. And we're seeing some of that stuff being developed now. And as far as like maybe the hardware side or the harder engineering sciences on the tech side, being able to do a road sample to differentiate between hemp and marijuana would be huge for law enforcement agencies. Being able to use a drone to do imaging of your crop to be able to identify where there's pests or nutrient deficiencies or otherwise, lack of water or overwatering, things of that nature. There's a million opportunities right now. It's a brand new industry still. And we've got a lot of really smart folk in the state on the tech side, and with Silicon Slopes, if you will, blowing up, it seems like there's a new massive company going in every day. There's no reason why we can't be industry leaders here, and we just need those folks to buy in and start putting effort towards it.
Okay, well, I am out loud putting my effort in because I think that we, as an industry, are missing the boat by not heavily being involved down in that area, if that's what you want to call it, right around the point of the mountain. Because not only are the business success, they've had tons of business success, but tech really is what's going to be required in order for this industry to move forward.
Yep.
Right? For years, it hasn't been studied, and there hasn't been a lot of R&D, and now it's coming and it's there. And I think that, I'd love to see them involved, especially with our association and what we're doing, because I think that there's a lot of players, and especially as the industry has moved forward. You're right. I'm seeing a lot of people previously that have not jumped on that are now adopting, and coming on. I think that there's a huge market in that space, both for the health and wellness and construction, textiles, building supplies. It's fascinating.
Yep. Agreed.
Well, very cool. John, you've been quiet today. I'm sorry. I'm talking like crazy.
For me, it's drinking from a fire hose. There's so much information. And the one thing that comes across is there's a need, there's a demand, there's a requirement almost to progress. And I'm thinking, wow, how many people know the information that's just been shared? And so it's one thing for us to chat about this and then distribute to our people. It's another thing to start organizing opportunities to get this information out there. And I think that's where a lot of people, if they're not already in the industry and they're already not aware of it, and I feel like most people are, they're aware of, the need for good product, the need for measurement, the need for tracking and all that. I feel like if the people don't already know, then there needs to be some sort of like a baby step before you get up to that, but I'm just soaking it all in. This was more information than I thought I was getting this morning, which is awesome because this is pretty amazing. And I realized how much more I need to learn, which is why I'm quiet. So I appreciate the conversation, and I love having Chris on here because Chris is more than a wealth of knowledge. He's a book of evolving, growing, encyclopedia-esque information that is so valuable and so helpful to our industry. It's amazing.
Well, thanks. I'm also a student. I'm constantly learning. I know what I know, and I sometimes don't know what I don't know. So I'm. The reason I may appear as knowledgeable is because I never accept ignorance for myself. If I don't know something, I'm going to research it until I know it well enough to speak about it and make an educated opinion on the subject. That's just sort of who I am. But there's a lot of people in the industry that know more than me about various subjects, and I'm always happy to learn from them. But I'm also happy to share information that I picked up, and I love helping spread education. Same.
And I think that's why this is so valuable and why I love having you on. with that being said, what is outside of your business, your current venture, your project, what's something in the industry you're most passionate about?
Outside of what I'm doing right now, I'm super passionate about legislative change. So not just specifically for my company and my industry, but generally speaking, getting the legislation to match what the industry needs, and have the legislation actually not contradict itself as well. It's not uncommon and it's not unique to the hemp industry for legislators to not fully understand what they're legislating. They're getting information the best they can get it at times. Sometimes they're not trying very hard to get information, but sometimes they're being told certain information from a pretty biased individual, and it's their best shot is like, well, I have no reason not to believe this, and it makes sense, so I'm going to legislate this way. And often they don't have the information necessary to make the best decision for the industry and the best industry for consumers. And they're trying, but they're falling short. And you can see this in the pressure, even at a huge federal level. The USDA, which is a monolith of an entity and has a lot of control in the country, the Farm Bill is arguably, which isn't written by the USDA by any means, but it affects how they operate significantly. It's one of the largest bills that gets passed every couple of years, and even the USDA has pressure from the DEA on how to regulate their program for growing. Like, why does the DEA have any input whatsoever on telling the USDA on how to tell farmers how to grow and how to tell states how to legislate? And then going above and beyond what legislation says to add things into regulation that weren't intended to. That's where we run into all kinds of problems, and it's going to stifle the industry. And things here locally, there's a bunch of gray area in the way the legislation is written. There's a bunch of misunderstandings. There's a bunch of complications with how the regulations were written based off the legislation. And a lot of it is due to not really understanding the industry. And, I appreciate, like Cody's comments the other day about wanting the industry to drive that change. And I think that's what needs to happen. But the industry needs to work with legislatures and with the departments of ag, not against them, because it's counterproductive. So, I'm really passionate about helping sort of make cohesion between an industry and legislators and regulators so that the entire community benefits from it. I don't want to take away the legislators' concerns they have. I want to address them, but address them in a way that makes the industry successful instead of hindered.
Yes. You gave me goosebumps because I think that you said it exactly right. We have to be working with them. They're on our team, not against us. And it's pretty frustrating when we're combating or people in our industry are combating rules and regulations that really are set up to benefit us, right? I understand the cost, for example, of registering products. And I bring this up only because it's a recent topic we've talked about. I get it's expensive for businesses initially, but the more people we have registered, the better we're able to manage product on the shelves, better we're able to, eliminate risk of bad product being out there and identify who's doing it right versus who needs some help or to step in or best practices, whatever it is.
Yeah, and realize, the intent of that regulation, right? Like, the intent is to create safety for consumers, not to make it difficult for product manufacturers.
Right.
Now, I think there's different ways we can do that'll benefit the industry better. But the legislators aren't there to say, how can we make this most difficult? They're saying, how can we, number one, make things safe? Let's put in a stopgap measure to make sure that's safe, and let's move forward, and maybe we can adjust if necessary. Now, I will say that I'm sure there's an audience member out there that's thinking, boy, you really just drink the Kool-Aid when it comes to backing legislators and regulators. That's not the case. But I do want to say that, especially here in Utah, specific to the hemp industry, I do feel like legislation was written trying to help hemp. And I do feel definitely that UDAF is very supportive of the hemp industry. And there's just some steps that need to be taken for us to work together for the industry to trust UDAF and UDAF to trust the industry. And I think it's sort of like any new relationship. You're feeling out the waters, you're learning if you can trust the other person and learning what works for them and what needs to work for you. And they came out strong with safety measures to make sure consumers are safe first. And then as we mature out of that, it's going to be worth working with them, not against them. And certainly I'm certain there are legislators who are like totally ignorant about cannabis and totally ignorant about hemp, and they don't care. They don't want to learn, and they're going to try to legislate it away if they can. Sure, they exist, but we're not going to change those people's minds today. Let's work with the people who do want to work with us, that do want to make it better. And then hopefully through that change, we can slowly move those, we'll call them stubborn anchors, off the seafloor a little bit. But we can't start there, right? You can't start in an adversarial position against a couple of outliers that are anti-industry. You have to start with the people on the inside that do want to work with the industry and help them be successful, so that we're successful.
Absolutely. Well, and it's lead by example, right?
Absolutely.
My goal is to really shed light and build relationships with people that are doing it right and have that same perspective as an industry whole, not one business or one entity. Mm-hmm. Okay, I know we're almost out of time, but I really wanted to ask you, we get a ton of questions about hemp flower in Utah.
Sure.
Can you describe it a little bit for me as far as you can't grow it and sell it in Utah, but you can grow it out and sell it outside of Utah? And then can you kind of break down, how are you running a hemp flower business in Utah, and how can people reach you when they want to buy or try product?
This is one of those tricky areas. Okay. So the way the law, the legislation, and the regulation are written, you can't technically sell floral material or plant material to a consumer, right? They really only want you selling that or moving that product to another licensee in order to process it for oil. I believe the intent is the fear that plant material, if anyone watching that doesn't know this, hemp and marijuana are the same plant. They're not different plants. And the cannabinoid side of cannabis or of hemp looks identical to the cannabinoid side of marijuana. The fiber side of hemp does look drastically different. It is the same plant. It's just a different variety, if you will, a different chemovar or not a phenotype, probably above that, but it's a different type. But if you look at a marijuana plant and a hemp plant grown for cannabinoids, they look identical. The flower material looks identical. It smells identical. It tastes identical. It smokes identical. You can't tell the difference with a dog. You can't tell the difference with a human eye. You can't tell the difference smoking it. The only time you tell the difference is if you do or don't feel a ton of psychoactivity from the material, or if you send it to a lab. And I think the legislature's primary fear was, we don't want people trafficking marijuana through the states on the black market and just saying it's hemp, because that's really difficult for law enforcement. And I can appreciate the difficulty there for law enforcement to have to make that distinction and the burden it puts on them. My opinion is that's, while relevant and should be addressed, that's not a reason to disallow an otherwise legal and safe product. So that's the legislation's written in such a way that floral material can't really be transported to consumers in Utah. So as a Utah entity that's bound by Utah law, licensed by Utah, and can be shut down by the state of Utah, you got to play by the rules.
Yeah.
There's an argument that it's counter or it's the antithesis of what the federal law means to implement, and there's some possibility that it's actually violating some of the federal language. But regardless, if you want to play in Utah, you got to follow Utah rules. So because of that, we can't sell to consumers in Utah. Farmers can't sell to consumers in Utah. But there's nothing stopping farmers from selling that plant material out of state. You can sell that plant material out of state as long as who you're selling to conforms to those state laws. So a buyer in Colorado can buy from a farm in Utah, and the Utah farmer can package up that 1 gram purchase to a consumer and send it to a Colorado consumer completely legally. And the thought there is Utah has no control over Colorado. They don't know what the end use is. The argument could be, well, this isn't for smoking, it's for creating my own tincture at home or making my own butter for whatever. And they can't legislate it. Utah can't legislate what Colorado does, right? So they have to default to what the feds say, and the feds say you can't interrupt interstate commerce. So technically, Utah can't stop farmers from selling product out of state, even if they wanted to. So we're in this situation where you can technically grow it as a high cannabinoid plant, but you can't sell the plant material to consumers if they're in Utah. Now, conversely, legislation was passed to allow consumers in Utah to bring CBD products from out of the state that aren't part of the registration, meaning it doesn't have to be a Utah registered product for you to bring that product out of state as long as it's federally compliant otherwise. There's a bunch of contradicting language in the legislation and regulation, and there's some gray area. So I won't get into that, but there's a solid argument to say you can bring in flower, and there's a smaller but not insignificant argument saying you can't. But generally speaking, I think even UDAF has stated they understand people can bring in flower from outside of the state. I think legislators kind of understand that as well, even though there's some iffy language. So you can purchase it as a Utah, and you just can't buy it from a Utah company. So inherently what happened here is a Utah farmer or Utah business can't sell flower to Utahns. That's the only thing that's actually restricted. Utah farmers can sell it to non-Utahns. Utahns can buy it from non-Utahns, but Utahns can't sell to Utahns. And so it's the language there has created a unnecessary burden on Utah business and Utah consumers from interacting with each other when they can interact with other states. So it's pretty frustrating. I understand the intent. I'm hoping we can get some wiggle room in the legislation, or perhaps UDAF can exercise some of their authority to quote unquote allow other products at their discretion to allow flower. I don't think it's going to happen, but it's worth a discussion. But as a consumer in Utah, and disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer. As a consumer in Utah, you can purchase flower and have it shipped to your house, and you can consume that product. I don't believe there's anything preventing combustion of hemp specifically in the language right now. You're safer if you vape it because you're not combusting, and it's just a little safer for you. I think it's a stronger argument that you're trying to follow the rules. And then as a seller, I can't sell to Utahns, which sucks because there's a lot of Utahns I'd love to sell to. So yeah, that's how we're operating. We're only working outside of the state. We have an option of moving our entire operation out of the state so we can sell back into the state. But that's not what we want to do. We want to be a Utah company.
I'd love to see us work together to make it so you are selling or can sell inside of Utah. Instead of watching businesses leave the state, I would love to collaborate to make it so that we can operate within the rules and allow business to be inside of Utah. That's really part of our whole push is sustainability and a growing economy around the hemp industry for Utah, right? For our nation, but definitely focus Utah.
Yeah. And I think it would be in Utah's best interest to go ahead and allow plant material to be sold to consumers, because then they can control how it's sold to consumers. You can say, you can sell to consumers, but it needs to have full panel testing. It needs to be Delta 9 compliant. It needs this labeling. You can't sell to anyone under the age of 21. You can only sell in these types of retail locations. Someone selling it has to have a retail license, which is a new license that they allow you to get. And they can control the safety aspect of it to say, hey, look, Utahns are buying this stuff anyway. Let's have them buy it from Utah businesses, and let's make sure it's safe. So I think it's in the legislation's and the regulators' best interest to allow the product, but just regulate it properly. And I don't think any farm or any business in Utah is going to have an issue with following proper product labeling and proper steps to get that in the hands of consumers. I think we'd all be very excited too.
Well, and again, it just comes back to we want this. We're willing to follow the rules and comply so that we can do this, right? And again, it comes back to we have to do it right, or we're all going to lose. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I'm going to put this out there. I vote you to head up and help with a lot of this, and I'm really excited to collaborate and really move forward. I had a couple people reach out this week that really, and I think I reached out to you. About the number of licenses that PAs and doctors are allowed to give out, or a number of medical cards. I was really taken back by that and the effect that it has on the number of people that are, one, able to get cards, and two, offices or clinics that are able to run or operate a business when they're only allowed 250 cards annually. I mean, that's not one a year. These guys are seeing patients every 20, 30 minutes or more. That's a few months worth of work and we're done. And so, yeah, I'd be interested in furthering that discussion, but really opening it up also. If there are other topics as business owners that you see as a concern, please come to our meetings. Please show up to the table or address them. Feel free to reach out to either Chris or I or John or Ryan, because these are topics that they're daily discussed, and there's no better way for us to change them up on legislation than working together at it. So I'm excited to meet again. Are you going to be there tomorrow, Chris? Or on the phone, I guess? We're going to
play a virtual meeting tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll definitely be there.
I just, out of COVID and the number of people and the footprint that we are gathering, I just think that we'll put a presentation together and give opportunity, but I think really putting the initiatives together for us as a collective, and I'm excited.
Yeah, and I think you'll have a better turnout too. Like, I don't mind driving to Salt Lake when it's necessary, but if I can avoid driving to Salt Lake for an hour meeting, I will.
Yeah. And I think you said it right, I want to open this. So with that being said, anybody that's listening that's interested in joining tomorrow, please drop a note or a comment, send me a message, and I'll shoot you over the link. But we'll just be meeting about the industry, what our plans are moving forward, the association goals and initiatives, and then opening it up for opportunity for everybody else to bring up topics that are of concern so that we can put our boots on the ground and move together. We're more powerful by numbers.
Right.
I also real quick want to give a shout out to Justin. He said on here that he was going to pay you $5 for every plug. And so I expect a 50-50 split on that.
Yes, deal.
And then as you kind of mentioned, some of the things that came up or from the tech space, like the tracking seed to shelf and the ability to know either satellite or for an imagery of what's happening, on your farm for large scale. I give shout out to some of our guests. Dave's got a product that's like that. There's a lot of things happening in Salt Lake and in Utah already that are, or nationwide that are working to solve those, some of our concerns or problems. And so I just think Utah is such a hot spot in both the tech, the manufacturing, we're agricultural, we've got inland port. So thank you very much. And I'm excited to grow this together and say that 10 years from now, we had a huge play in economic growth or boom outside of the tech industry.
Yeah, agreed.
Or alongside, how about that?
Yeah, and I know we're like really close on time here. I don't know how much time we actually have, but part of the both the tech and the legislation sort of bring these two concepts together. Something we can't really do in the state right now that is a problem is we can't really have seed breeding programs properly. There are certainly folks that are taking genetics from outside of the state and propagating seed, but that's not the same. That's more like a manufacturing, like I'm making more seed of seed that exists, but we don't have any breeding programs to create new cultivars and to help create new genetics in the state. And the reason is it's incredibly time consuming to do this properly. Not only it takes a lot of time and a lot of investment, but you end up with a lot of product and a lot of product that's going to go hot, right? If you're trying to create a new genetic, there's a good chance you're bringing in other material to breed with that material, and you're going to grow, 100 plants or 1,000 plants, and then you're going to pheno hunt for what you want, and then you're going to rebreed that in, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of that material is not going to be compliant material inherent to the process, and there's no room for that in the state. You can't breed that material to try to create genetics that are compliant, that are also diverse and offer a wide range of benefits with wide ranges of profiles in the state. So what farmers are left to do is purchase genetics out of the state. And where are they buying genetics from? Most of these breeders exist in states where they're not too afraid of going hot because they live in a state where there's a program for this. It's either rec or it's medical, and they've got their licensing straightened out. It's not too cost limited for them to do that. And so you end up buying seeds from someone that potentially could be also creating high THC genetics. Sure. And heaven forbid you get the wrong box of seeds because it was mislabeled due to human error, and now you're a Utah growing a bunch of marijuana that you didn't intend to.
Or even if you have good seed, there's such a small window of error that even if you know what you're doing, when you're mixing and growing and changing water and soil and light and air, I mean, there's so many things that could change when it peaks and when it
and you know, cannabis is certain genetics will perform better in certain environments, right? It's sort of like wine, right? Where if you take the same seed and plant it in Northern California and then plant it in Missouri, if it's outdoor and not indoor grown and totally controlled, you're going to get two different plants from the same genetics because of the environment and how those genetics are going to express. And so I really think it's important that we have a breeding program here to Utah to create compliant material for the Utah environment to protect farmers from going hot. And, you know, there's a whole huge discussion here about what makes a plant go hot. But the bottom line is it starts with genetics. Whether you think it ends there or not, it's a different story. But at least starts with genetics. And we should have breeding programs here in the state creating Utah compliant genetics that thrive in the Utah environment for Utah farmers. And right now, there's no way to do that.
Because like it or not, it's here to stay.
Yeah.
Everything about it is here to stay. Why not set ourselves up for success so that we can compete on the big scale down the road?
Yeah.
You know?
And someone said here, you know, just recently, what about working on legislation on mitigating hot crops in the distillation process? Absolutely. There's no reason if your crop goes hot and it should be destroyed. It should just be pipelined into a remediative process and still used for oil. Or that material should be able to be sold into the legal medical marijuana market as long as the right checks and balances are put in place, right? I was really excited when I first heard UDAF was going to create the hemp waste program as a pipeline into the medical market. But then to find out that it still had to be compliant material. And I'm like, well, what's the point?
Well, it's waste at that point, right?
Well, yeah, it truly is for waste. It's for your trim material that you're going to throw away that you can sell into that market so they can extract it for CBD. But that's not super beneficial. You can extract it yourself. You can do other stuff with it. There's no big win there for the hemp industry. Now, if you said, hey, look, if it's hot up to 2% total THC, that could then be pipelined into the marijuana side of the business. That's going to prevent a loophole of someone growing weed without a license and selling in the weed market, but also provide a buffer for farmers. If they do go hot, it's not a total loss. And there's a lot of things we can do legislatively here to help farmers. You shouldn't go from I made a mistake on my crop to now I'm a criminal growing 100 acres of marijuana.
Let alone bankrupt.
Yeah, and go bankrupt.
Bankrupt. I mean, it's bankrupting. You know, there's a reason that Utah's hemp industry in the agricultural spectrum hasn't taken off. I know most of the farmers I spoke to are growing less this year than they grew last year.
Oh yeah, like by a 1/10.
Yes, and so it's pretty scary when now it's their risk, right? Again, it's back to of the farmer, and anything we can do as an association and a collective to help that's where I want to go. I know John's going to say I gotta go.
What's that?
You're good.
Yeah, okay.
I was waiting for him to be like, guys, I gotta go. I gotta get off this.
No, I don't have to go. Are we good on time still?
Yeah, we're at 1 hour and 20 minutes.
Okay. So do we need to cut it off?
Yeah, I think we probably can. Okay. But I would love to continue these conversations. You know, there are, when I talk about highlighting people that are doing it right, I can't say it enough, both you and Haley. I'd really love to talk to Haley too. I'm going to call and pester her and see if I can't get her on, because I'd love to speak with another woman in the industry. It's funny. I think that somebody said this a while back, Amy did, that the female plant really needs some female representation. And I would love to have her involvement as much for a lot of reasons. But yeah, if we can continue this, and I'd love to continue to bring you on. There's a few people that I think I I don't want to say need, but deserve to be on. And Chris, I definitely put you at the top. You're extremely knowledgeable. You're willing to help, and all of the reasons you're doing this are right in line with what we want as far as the industry. And so, yeah, I'd love to schedule a time either regularly to come back and discuss some of the legislation and what you're really passionate about, because I think that's something that we as a whole need to know, and all of our listeners need to know, that we're a resource collectively, right? And here's what we're working on, and here are some of the things that are being addressed. And so jumping on board or showing up to the table, having that conversation, right?
Yeah.
Also, I open the invite for you, both you, John, or anyone. If you know somebody else that you think that should be at the table tomorrow, please don't hesitate to invite them, or on our call tomorrow. Don't hesitate to invite them. We'd love to open the conversation. Other than that, yeah. Do you have anything else, Chris, you want to say or add?
I mean, I could go on for hours and hours, so probably not.
Me too. Me too. Well,
but I appreciate you guys. I appreciate the CBD Collective and what you guys are doing, and just the sheer motivation to produce content that's beneficial to your viewers on a daily basis is really appreciated and needed.
Well, it's been fun. Ryan says, Chris knows his stuff.
Thanks, Ryan.
I'd love to have him. Really what I think we should do when we talk about our rural communities is creating an opportunity for a panel discussion, where we have you and Ryan and some other people up on the board, where we're up on the panel and discuss questions for our farmers and walk through some of these concerns. Because, I mean, just like some of the experiences and events we've been to, like the one over at USU, they're successful and the farmers will drive and show up. And so we'll collaborate on that after COVID, maybe.
Yes. Yep.
Dang it. Okay, well, thank you very much, Chris. Thanks very much, everybody, for listening, and we'll see you later.
Awesome. Thanks. Appreciate it. See you guys.
Okay, see ya.